Rami Kaminsky, The Gift of Not Belonging: How Outsiders Thrive in a World of Joiners. It begins for so many with a quiet ache, a sense of standing just outside the circle, watching life unfold through a pane of invisible glass. You laugh at the right jokes, show up at the right parties, and speak the right small talk, and yet you feel it. The disconnect, the impersonation, the performative belonging that never quite fits. Enter the Ottrovert, a person who doesn't face inward like an introvert or outward like an extrovert, but in a different direction entirely. Ottroverts can be social, warm, and even magnetic in one-on-one settings, but they lack the innate drive to join, conform, or feel part of a group. Importantly, Ottroversion shouldn't be looked at as a pathology. Instead, it's a powerful, overlooked mode of being. In this blink, you'll explore how Ottroverts navigate a world built around groupthink and belonging. You'll also discover why connection doesn't require conformity, why individuality isn't a flaw, and how honoring your own inner compass can lead to a more fulfilled, self-directed life. Meet the Ottrovert. Most people fear being left out, but for some, the real discomfort begins when they're included. Let's consider a bright, sensitive teenager who we'll call A. She's someone who's invited to every party, but rarely goes. She's not anxious, unpopular, or bullied. In fact, adults are drawn to her, sensing something unusual in her quiet presence. She isn't lonely when she's alone or with close friends, only when she's surrounded by many others. And the harder her parents try to help her fit in, the more alien she feels. There's nothing wrong with A at all. She's simply an Ottrovert. Ottroverts occupy a unique psychological space that differs from introverts and extroverts, whom we might call communal people. Communal people want to be invited into groups and follow group rules in order to be included. They have different ways of going about it. Introverts find it extremely difficult to form deep one-on-one relationships with others, so they seek the security of shared identity, even if it means hanging out on the sidelines. Meanwhile, extroverts need an audience and crave the social rewards that come with charismatic group participation. In different ways, both of these types look toward the center of their social groups. Meanwhile, Ottroverts face outward, even when they're standing on the inside. Despite strong social skills, they feel fundamentally disconnected from the shared experience that binds others together. So, what else sets Ottroverts apart? Well, for starters, they strongly prefer one-on-one interactions over group activities. They also avoid organized events and team sports, and would rather do school or work projects individually than in a group. At social gatherings, they prefer to be off the side having a deep conversation with one person. Or they might enjoy performing a specific role that sets them apart from the crowd, like public speaker or DJ. They're nonconformists who march to their own rhythm, showing little interest in popular culture or group trends. Rather than seeking advice about how to live, they trust their own judgment. They're more often specialists than generalists, preferring to pursue deep knowledge in narrow areas rather than spreading themselves across many interests. Importantly, being an Ottrovert isn't a spectrum. It's binary. You either buy into the collective thinking of groups or you don't. In that way, it's less of a preference and more like left-handedness, an unchangeable core trait. This non-belonging is total and unchangeable, but it shouldn't be viewed as a burden. When the Ottrovert leans into her strengths, her solitude can be an opportunity for freedom and self-acceptance. The teenager A, for example, is now a successful PhD candidate in psychology. She found contentment not by forcing herself to fit in, but by accepting her role as an observer and focusing on the relationships and activities that genuinely fulfill her. What Autroverts aren't. Now that we have a foundational picture of an Autrovert, let's turn our attention to understanding why they are so often misread. After all, their unique combination of outward social skill and inner non-belonging tends to create confusion. They seem outgoing but aren't extroverts. They enjoy solitude but don't retreat inward like introverts. Because their behavior doesn't match their inner experience, they're routinely misunderstood by therapists, teachers, and loved ones. One of the most common misconceptions is that Autroverts are introverts, but the difference is stark. Introverts withdraw from overstimulation into their own private world. Autroverts, by contrast, remain outward-facing. They're often too attuned, sensing mood shifts, group tensions, and every social cue in the room. For them, being in a crowd is not overwhelming because of inner shyness, but because they feel involuntarily absorbed into a group they don't identify with. They can't tune it out, but they can't join it either. Autroverts are also often mistaken for nonconformists. But they're not resisting group norms out of rebellion or ideology, they simply don't perceive the group as psychologically real. Where most people find comfort in consensus, Autroverts find it confusing or even irrelevant. Symbols that represent group identity, like flags or college bumper stickers, strike them as empty. They're not defying meaning, they just don't see it in the first place. Likewise, Autroverts are often mistakenly diagnosed with social anxiety. Take DC, a woman who'd been treated for social anxiety for years with little improvement. That's because the treatment was meant to address social phobia, which DC didn't actually have. Instead, she just needed to embrace her sense of non-belonging and lean into her strengths. Autroverts are also frequently mistaken for neurodivergent individuals, but the difference runs deep. Neurodivergent people often struggle with social cues or impulse control. Autroverts don't. They're often more self-aware, more attuned, and more disciplined than even neurotypical communal people. Because they're deeply considerate and adept at following social scripts, their inner non-belonging is almost invisible. Even their charisma can lead observers astray. Many Autroverts perform social confidence through what's known as pseudo-extroversion. As we already mentioned, they tend to adopt roles like host, presenter, or DJ at gatherings in order to create structure and psychological distance. These roles give them a sanctioned reason to stand apart. Over time, most Autroverts leave these performances behind and build lives anchored in one-on-one connection, meaningful work, and inner coherence. The core misunderstanding is this: people assume everyone wants to belong, but Autroverts don't. They're not broken versions of communal people, they're complete in their autonomy. A world designed for joiners. Picture a 10-year-old at a Scouts meeting, eager to be part of something bigger. But then the ceremony begins, and he's expected to recite pledges of duty and loyalty. Immediately, he feels like an alien observer watching a strange ritual unfold. That 10-year-old was the author, and the moment captured an early realization that he was fundamentally different from his peers. From the moment we're born, the world starts teaching us how to belong. Sharing toys, taking turns, raising our hands in class. It all prepares us to move smoothly within groups. There's a prevailing belief that humans are naturally wired for belonging, but that's only half the story. We're all born with an attachment impulse to our caregivers, but the drive to belong to larger groups isn't innate, it's taught. From birth until around age 3, children exist in a naturally introverted state. They're completely self-focused and oblivious to group dynamics. Over time, they're trained to share, wait their turn, and prioritize group harmony. Parents and teachers praise cooperation and discourage self-centeredness until conformity feels like second nature. But for introverts, the social conditioning never quite sticks. They understand the rules, but they don't feel compelled to play the game. As they go, the pressure to belong intensifies, first through adolescence, then via religion, politics, work, and family. The message is constant: togetherness equals happiness. For introverts, that message can feel suffocating. Worse, nonconformity is often pathologized. When introverts don't mesh, they're labeled antisocial, anxious, or even disordered. One patient, T, came from a wealthy, traditional family and spent years trying to meet its rigid expectations. Eventually, she became bedridden, and her emotional exhaustion was misdiagnosed as a series of psychiatric conditions. She only began to thrive when she gave herself permission to live on her own terms, leaving her career and moving to a South Pacific island to become a diving instructor. Rather than fight her introversion, she honored it. Introverts often feel like dancers who missed rehearsal. Even mundane social situations, like standing in line or chatting at a barbecue, can be draining. So they learn to perform. They smile, nod, mingle briefly, then slip away. This performance helps them get by, but it leaves them depleted. One patient, Jay, spent years attending obligatory family functions out of guilt. Once he began sorting necessary obligations from unnecessary ones, his energy returned and his resentment faded. Often, introverts find that skipping events they don't want to attend has zero real consequences. People who matter continue to care about them, and those who judge their absence are precisely the ones they didn't want to spend time with anyway. As the author himself discovered, you don't need permission to leave the party. You just need the clarity to know you'd be happier at home. The world may be designed for joiners, but happiness isn't. The introvert life. Life is a group project. At least that's what society seems to believe. From the playground to the boardroom, from group chats to family reunions, we're trained to join in, fit in, and stay in. But introverts never quite get the hang of it. By tracing how this unique way of being unfolds across each life stage, we can better understand the struggles that define the introvert path. In childhood, the signs are subtle but unmistakable. Introvert kids often prefer the company of adults to peers. They're curious, emotionally perceptive, and disarmingly mature, but reluctant to engage in group play. Introverts are content playing alone and immune to bullying, since being excluded is hardly a punishment for someone who isn't interested in inclusion anyway. Organized activities, summer camps, sports teams, birthday parties, tend to drain rather than delight them. Introvert kids are naturally curious and inventive, asking questions that challenge accepted knowledge. However, their specialist rather than generalist nature can create academic challenges. They excel deeply in subjects that interest them, but they sometimes struggle with time management and getting perfect grades across the board. Adolescence represents the most challenging period for introverts, when the pressure to belong reaches its peak intensity. Some respond by becoming reckless pseudo-extroverts, adopting wild personas that go against their naturally careful and risk-averse nature. M, for instance, was a girl from a privileged family who previously excelled academically and in sports. But when she turned 14, she became irritable and moody, self-harmed, drank alcohol constantly, and even had an abortion. Despite being the queen bee, she secretly hated all the parties and preferred staying at home with her dog to paint. Eventually, she embraced her introvert nature and found peace starting and running an animal sanctuary. In adulthood, work is the main battleground. The corporate world's endless meetings, office politics, and collaborative requirements can be soul-crushing for introverts. By contrast, they perform best in independent roles where they can make their own decisions and think creatively. One patient, Dee, left her job in HR to launch her own consultancy and rediscovered her energy and joy. Finally, old age often brings unexpected ease for introverts who cultivated rich inner worlds their whole lives. They arrive at old age well prepared for the solitary journey death represents. While communal people often panic, realizing belonging was largely an illusion, introverts have always understood this truth. Whether you're raising an introvert child or teen, or are an introvert yourself, the key lies in self-acceptance. The author calls this approach the art of letting be, this creating a life that honors rather than fights the introvert's intrinsic nature. Introvert superpowers. Back in the early 90s, the author was running a schizophrenia unit at Mount Sinai Hospital. Around 20% of the patients there had been labeled non-responders, people who didn't respond to medication or therapy. Many had been institutionalized for decades, heavily medicated, and written off as hopeless. But the author, guided by the introvert's refusal to accept conventional wisdom, began to wonder, what if the patients weren't broken, but the system was? That question eventually led him to launch the Second Chance program, which reassessed each non-responder from scratch. With proper diagnosis and support, hundreds of patients were able to reclaim their lives. This example illustrates one of the introvert's greatest gifts: independence from collective judgment. Untethered from groupthink, introverts evaluate ideas on their own merits, even when those ideas go against the grain. This makes introverts natural innovators in fields trapped by conventional thinking. Of course, there are many challenges to being an introvert, but the benefits far outweigh them. Even when their ideas or decisions are unusual, introverts possess great self-trust. Others depend on approval and validation, but introverts trust their own instincts. One of the author's patients was locked in a bitter custody battle with her abusive ex-husband. She was under immense pressure from lawyers and family to win, yet she recognized the stress was destroying her health. So she chose to walk away, and instead of defeat, she felt relief. For her, an introvert, peace of mind mattered more than proving a point. Another gift of the introvert is his comfort with solitude, which actually enables remarkably authentic connections. Freed from social scripts, introverts skip small talk and dive straight into meaningful exchange. These conversations don't always lead to friendship, but when bonds form, they're grounded in loyalty, generosity, and zero pretense. Perhaps the introvert's greatest strength lies in her rich inner life. Communal people avoid their inner world because that's where they feel alone. They police their thoughts and suppress emotions they believe the collective deems inappropriate. But introverts never abandon their inner world. They recognize that only their actions, not their feelings, can be judged. This, in turn, allows them access to the full spectrum of their imaginations. What others seek through psychedelics or intense therapy comes naturally to introverts, who never learned to suppress inner complexity for social acceptability. The introvert walks a path few even notice. Quiet, solitary, inward. But it's from this path that paradigm shifts are born. Free from the pressure to conform or impress, introverts carry a rare gift: the ability to think without echo, feel without permission, and act without applause. The main takeaway of this blink to The Gift of Not Belonging by Rami Kaminsky is that Otroverts, deeply perceptive people who feel no pull toward group identity, are often misunderstood but uniquely gifted. Unmoved by social pressure, they think independently, form authentic one-to-one bonds, and embrace solitude without shame. Their rich inner lives, instinctive self-trust, and immunity to groupthink make them natural innovators in a world addicted to consensus. Far from broken, Otroverts are quietly built for transformation. Well, that's it for this blink. We hope you enjoyed it. If you can, please take the time to leave us a rating, as we always appreciate your feedback. Hope to see you again in the next blink.